18-year-old white girl defends elderly black couple on a bus from a drunk racist woman. Someone recorded it, and it went viral. Later, a millionaire contacted the young girl. Emily Collins was on her way home after a long day at school. At 18, the world already seemed complicated enough with the pressure of exams and the constant uncertainty about her future. The bus was crowded, as always, but there was something in the air that made the afternoon feel strange. Sitting at the back, headphones in her ears, and her eyes lost in the streets passing by the window, she didn't immediately notice the commotion starting in the aisle. It was when she removed her headphones for a moment that she heard the shrill voice of a woman, clearly drunk, yelling at an elderly couple at the front. The couple, an older black man with gray hair and a woman whose trembling hands clutched a worn-out purse, were doing everything they could to ignore the woman. She was drunk, staggering between the seats, pointing her finger in their faces, and shouting insults that made anyone's spine twist. "You don't belong here. This country isn't for you." The woman spat, her face contorted by hate and alcohol. The passengers seemed frozen, most staring at the floor, pretending nothing was happening. The driver wasn't intervening, perhaps used to this kind of chaos. Emily felt her heart racing. She looked around, hoping someone would stand up, say something. But no one moved. Before we continue with the story, I just want to take a moment to thank you for watching and supporting this video. It really means a lot to me. I hope you enjoy it. At that moment, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the memory of her grandmother always saying, "Staying silent in the face of injustice is the same as agreeing with it." Maybe it was the look of pain and humiliation on the elderly woman's face, now wiping away silent tears. Emily wasn't sure, but before she knew it, she was standing, walking toward the front of the bus, feeling all eyes on her. "Stop it!" she yelled, her voice surprisingly firm for someone whose heart was about to leap out of her chest. The woman turned, surprised, and her rage-filled eyes landed on Emily. "Who do you think you are?" The woman screamed, moving toward Emily with her breath reeking of alcohol. But Emily didn't back down. "These people didn't do anything to you. If anyone needs to leave, it's you," she said, her whole body trembling, but her words filled with conviction. The woman tried to advance, but at that moment, other passengers started to stand up, murmuring in support of Emily. An older man even placed his hand on the racist woman's shoulder, trying to calm her, but she pushed him away. "They don't belong here. These filthy in." "Enough!" Emily shouted, cutting her off before she could continue. "I'm not going to let you talk to them like that. Leave. Now." The woman hesitated for a second, confused by the unexpected courage of this young, fragile-looking girl. By then, someone had already started silently recording the scene on their phone. What seemed like an isolated incident would soon take on much larger proportions. With no other option, the woman staggered toward the bus exit, still shouting incoherent insults. When she finally got off, the silence that followed was almost deafening. Emily turned to the elderly couple, now visibly shaken, and asked if they were okay. The elderly woman took her hand with her own trembling ones, and with tears in her eyes, whispered her thanks. Emily returned to the back of the bus, feeling all the passengers' eyes on her. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, but there was a sense of relief and strength inside her. She had never done anything like that before. She put her headphones back on, and somehow, the music sounded different, as if the world had changed in some way. But what she didn't know was that, as the bus continued on its route, the video of her bravery was already being shared on social media. What had started as an act of empathy and justice on a small bus would soon become a story known across the country. Emily didn't expect the incident on the bus to go beyond that moment. She thought it was just a spur-of-the-moment action, something any decent person would have done. However, when she got home that night, the life she knew was about to change. While having dinner with her parents, her phone began to vibrate incessantly. The notifications were so many that they seemed never to stop. At first, it was messages from friends and classmates asking if she was the girl in the video they were watching. Confused, Emily opened the first link someone had sent her. And there it was, the recording of the entire scene on the bus, with thousands of views and growing rapidly. She felt a chill run down her spine. The video had been posted on several platforms, and people were frantically commenting on her bravery, her pale and determined face standing out as she confronted the drunk woman. Who is this girl? She's a hero. We need more Emilis in the world, were just some of the comments. However, with sudden fame also came criticism. Some questioned her motives, saying she just wanted attention. Others defended the racist woman, suggesting she was merely out of control from the alcohol. Emily, are you okay? Her mother asked, noticing her daughter's disturbed expression as she held her trembling phone. I'm fine, Mom. I just wasn't expecting this. In the days that followed, the video continued to circulate and gain traction. Journalists started seeking out Emily, wanted to know more about the girl who had the courage to stand up against racism so publicly. A local TV show tried to contact her for an interview, and even people she didn't know were sending messages of support. On the other hand, Emily also started receiving hateful messages. Some accused her of overreacting, saying she shouldn't have interfered. Others called her a traitor for defending Black people, something that left her perplexed and distressed. She had never imagined that her simple, impulsive act of human decency could divide people's opinions so much. It was hard to process everything. The sudden fame, even though unwanted, was taking its toll. Emily began to feel an enormous weight on her shoulders, as if every step she took was being watched, analyzed, and judged by millions of people. She felt exposed, vulnerable. She couldn't go out anymore without being recognized, and each time it happened, she didn't know if she should smile or hide her face. But what hurt the most was the silence around her. At school, her classmates started treating her differently. Some praised her, while others avoided her. Her closest friends didn't know how to act, and the conversations that once flowed naturally now felt forced, with every word being measured carefully. And then, one afternoon, while she was in her room trying to ignore the endless notifications on her phone, she received an unexpected message. The name on the screen was unfamiliar, but the message immediately caught her attention. Hello, Emily. I'm Edward Thompson. I'd like to talk to you about an important opportunity. I know you're going through a tough time with all this attention, but I believe I can help. I'm a businessman, and I was deeply moved by what you did. Let's talk. She read and reread the message several times. She didn't know who this man was, but something about the polite and empathetic way he addressed her piqued her curiosity. After a few hours of hesitation, she decided to respond. Thank you for the message. I'm not really used to all this that's happening, but I'm willing to hear what you have to say. Little did she know that this response would be the beginning of something that would change her life forever. The next morning, Emily received a phone call. The voice on the other end was calm and refined, like someone used to big negotiations. Edward Thompson was a familiar name. She recognized him as one of the most respected businessmen in the country, a philanthropist with vast wealth and numerous social projects across the United States. Emily, I saw the video and was inspired by your courage. In times when many choose silence, you chose the voice of justice, and that deserves recognition. I want to offer you a full scholarship to any college of your choice. I know you may be surprised, but I believe the world needs more people like you, and I want to help ensure you have the opportunities you deserve. Emily was speechless. The idea of going to college had always been on her mind, but her family's finances were tight. Though she was a dedicated student, she always feared she wouldn't be able to afford the university she dreamed of attending. And now, suddenly, this man, who she barely knew, was offering her the chance to make that dream come true. I don't know what to say, she murmured, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. It's such generosity. I don't even know if I deserve all of this. You deserve it, Emily. Your courage is rare. Society needs more leaders like you, and it's my duty to help cultivate those leaders. Think about it. You don't have to give me an answer right now. Take your time. After hanging up, Emily stood there processing what had just happened. It felt like her world had turned upside down. The weight she had been feeling on her shoulders seemed even heavier now, but there was also a new feeling. Hope. She looked out her bedroom window, where autumn leaves were slowly falling, and wondered, was she ready for this new journey? What was next for her life now that she had accidentally become a public figure? Edward Thompson's offer hovered in Emily's mind like a golden promise, but also a source of anxiety. While her parents congratulated her and her friends excitedly discussed what she should do, Emily felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. That week, the story continued to gain momentum in the media. The video from the bus was now everywhere. Social networks, news broadcasts, even international websites. Emily's determined face, as she defended the elderly couple, had become a symbol of the fight against racism. However, the 18-year-old was still processing everything. She didn't know how to deal with all this attention. While her actions were being praised, she was also facing hateful and harsh criticism. Some messages were cruel, with words she never imagined would be directed at her. This girl just wants attention, some said. This is what happens when kids get involved in adult matters. Emily felt a growing lump in her throat. She knew she shouldn't care about these negative voices, but it was impossible to ignore them completely. Deep down, she was fighting doubt. Had she really done something so extraordinary? Did she truly deserve all this recognition? One evening, while having dinner with her family, the silence at the table seemed thicker than usual. Her parents had avoided discussing the scholarship in recent days, but Emily knew they were worried. "Emily, honey, can we talk for a minute?" her mother asked, breaking the silence, her voice soft but cautious. Emily looked up from her plate and nodded. She knew what was coming next. Her father watched her with the same worried look he had carried since the beginning of this storm. "We've been watching everything that's happening with you, and well, we can't help but feel a bit concerned. You're just a teenager, and now the whole world seems to know who you are." Her father, David, cleared his throat, interrupting his wife with a deep but loving voice. "We don't want you to feel pressured into making such a big decision because of what people expect from you." Emily took a deep breath. She understood her parents' concerns, but she also felt like she couldn't escape this situation. Something inside her told her that this was her moment, a chance to change her future. "I understand, Mom, Dad, but honestly, I'm more lost than you can imagine," she admitted, feeling tears start to well up in her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I only stood up for those people because I couldn't stand seeing that. I never wanted all this attention. And now this scholarship. It feels like my life is spiraling out of control." Her mother, Laura, gently took her hand. "We're here to support you, Emily. You were incredibly brave, but no one expects you to carry the world on your shoulders. We want you to be happy, no matter what decision you make." Emily nodded, trying to hold back her tears. She knew she had loving parents, and that gave her some comfort, but the decision was still enormous. The scholarship that Edward Thompson offered was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, one that could change the course of her life forever. And at the same time, the repercussions of her action on the bus continued to grow each day. It felt like the whole world was watching her, waiting for her next step. The next day, Emily decided to meet with Edward Thompson. He had given her his personal number, saying he would be available whenever she was ready to talk. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe downtown, far from the press and the curious public eye. Emily arrived early, her stomach full of nerves. She had never met anyone so important before, and the responsibility of her decision weighed heavily on her. When Edward entered the cafe, he greeted her with a warm smile. A middle-aged man, tall, well-dressed, but with a welcoming demeanor. He seemed genuinely happy to see her. "Emily, I'm glad you came," he said, sitting across from her. "I imagine you must be feeling overwhelmed by all of this. And I want you to know that the scholarship offer comes with no pressure. It's just an opportunity." Emily was silent for a moment, looking at her hands clasped together on the table. "I am very grateful, Mr. Thompson." But to be honest, I don't know if I'm ready for something this big. I never imagined myself in this position. Edward smiled kindly. That's understandable. You've gone through something extraordinary. And sometimes opportunities show up in unexpected ways. But you don't need to decide now. I just want you to know that I see a bright future for you. And if you choose to accept, I'll be here to make sure you have all the support you need. The conversation with Edward left her a little calmer. He didn't seem to be pressuring her, but rather offering a helping hand. However, as she walked home that afternoon, Emily realized that the real battle was happening inside her. When she got home, she opened her laptop and started researching the colleges she had always dreamed of attending. Each one seemed like a door to a better future, a future that, until then, had seemed unreachable. She imagined herself studying at a big university, meeting new people, expanding her horizons. It was tempting. It was almost perfect. But at the same time, there was something deeper. The incident on the bus had marked her in a way she didn't fully understand yet. Emily was no longer the same girl who only worried about exams and her academic future. Something inside her was crying out for justice, to do more for the world around her. Defending that couple had made her feel a strength she didn't know she had. And now, she was faced with a choice. Follow the path she had always imagined, or embrace a greater purpose, even if it meant giving up a more comfortable and predictable life. Little by little, a truth began to emerge. Emily couldn't ignore what she was feeling anymore. Her heart was torn between the dream and the sacrifice, between the opportunity to secure her future and the responsibility to use her voice to fight for something bigger. And no matter how much she tried to avoid it, she knew that soon she would have to make a definitive choice. As the autumn leaves piled up outside her window, Emily realized her life would never be the same. The weeks that followed brought an avalanche of changes in Emily's life. Edward Thompson's offer still hung in the air, but something was holding her back from accepting it. She felt confused, torn between the weight of external expectations and the need to discover what she truly wanted for herself. Nevertheless, the media attention didn't die down. TV shows, newspapers, and even civil rights organizations started reaching out to her for interviews and statements. The simple video recorded on a bus had turned into a powerful symbol, and Emily was now seen as a sort of spokesperson against prejudice. Every day, the young woman found herself more and more involved in a world she had never been a part of before. It was as if everyone expected her to take a stand, as if she had suddenly become an expert on racial issues. Emily read and studied on the subject, trying to understand the depth of the problem she had confronted so instinctively on that bus. But as she learned more, her sense of inadequacy grew. She was just an ordinary teenager, with ordinary dreams and fears. How could she speak for so many people who had suffered in ways she couldn't even imagine? One day, while sitting in her living room with her parents, a new message popped up on her phone. It was from the couple she had defended. "Emily, we would love to meet with you to thank you personally for everything you did for us. We are Henry and Margaret Williams. The story has taken on proportions we never imagined. But to us, you are just the brave girl who didn't leave us alone that day." The words were like balm to Emily's heart. She had been feeling disconnected from everything and everyone lately, as if the world around her was a fog of expectations. Maybe meeting them would bring her some clarity. With her heart racing, she accepted the invitation. The following Saturday, Emily found herself in a modest but welcoming neighborhood, just a few blocks from where it had all happened. Nervousness gripped her as she rang the bell of the small house. The door opened, revealing an older man with white hair and a gentle smile. His eyes, which in the video seemed filled with pain and humiliation, now sparkled with gratitude. "You must be Emily," Henry said, opening the door wider with a warm smile. "Please come in. Margaret and I have been looking forward to getting to know you better." She hesitated a little as she entered, but was soon welcomed by the woman who had moved her so much on the bus. Margaret seemed stronger now, her face revealing a mix of emotions. She extended her arms, and to Emily's surprise, pulled her into a firm hug. "Thank you, dear. I don't even know how to express how much what you did means to us. You didn't just protect us in that moment, but you also gave hope to so many others." They sat down in the cozy, modest living room, the walls decorated with old photos and family portraits. The environment was serene, a complete contrast to the tension of the incident that had brought them together. Henry and Margaret began to share a little about their story. They had been married for nearly 50 years and had faced all kinds of prejudice throughout their lives. At a time when racial segregation was still a reality, their love had survived judgmental looks, threats, and a lot of hatred. "We've been through a lot, Emily," Henry said in a low but firm voice. "But that day on the bus was one of the hardest moments we've faced in years. Being treated like that reminded us of everything we've fought so hard to overcome. And then you appeared, like an angel, and stood up for us. You were our strength when ours had failed." Emily felt a tightness in her chest. She had never thought of herself as someone capable of making such a difference. To her, it had been a momentary act of indignation, but to this couple, it had meant so much more. Margaret took her hand, tears in her eyes. "I know you must be feeling an immense weight right now," said the elderly woman. "The whole world is trying to put labels on you, expecting you to say or do something. But remember, you've already done enough just by being there for us. No one could take that from you." Emily remained silent, absorbing those words. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, someone truly saw her, not as the brave girl from the video, but as Emily, the scared and lost young woman still trying to understand what it all meant. Before they said their goodbyes, Henry and Margaret surprised her once more. "We wanted you to know that you'll always have a place in our lives, no matter what happens," Henry said. "If you ever need help, if you ever want to talk, if you need a place to escape from all this home is yours too." Emily couldn't hold back her tears this time. It was a silent cry of relief and gratitude. That couple, who should have been burdened by trauma, were now offering support and comfort to her, as if they were her grandparents. When she finally left the Williams home, something inside her had changed. On the way back, Emily decided to do something she had been putting off for weeks. She picked up the phone and called Edward Thompson. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice steady. "I've made my decision." There was a brief but loaded pause on the other end. "And what is it, Emily?" "I accept your offer. I want to use this opportunity to learn, to become someone who can help more people like Mr. Henry and Mrs. Margaret. But I want you to know that I'm not just accepting a scholarship. I want to do more. I want to use my voice to speak for those who can't defend themselves." Edward was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was full of respect and pride. "I knew you'd make the best decision, Emily, and I want you to know that I'll support you every step of the way." After hanging up, Emily took a deep breath. She felt lighter than she had in weeks. She didn't have all the answers yet, and she still didn't know exactly how to turn this experience into something meaningful, but now she had a purpose. With the scholarship secured, she would start a new journey, not just as a student, but as someone willing to fight for what she believed in. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, Emily no longer felt afraid. She felt hopeful, and above all, she felt that in some way, her place in the world was beginning to take shape. The decision to accept the scholarship and embrace a larger purpose brought with it a series of new challenges and responsibilities. With each passing day, Emily found herself more involved in social activism and conversations about equality and justice. The weight of being a public figure was overwhelming. Before taking any step, before saying any word, Emily thought about the consequences. Her private life, which had once been so simple, was now swallowed by a tide of commitments, interviews, and charity events. Shortly after announcing that she had accepted Edward Thompson's offer, Emily was invited to attend a public event organized by a major civil rights organization. She hesitated at first. She didn't see herself as an activist or speaker, but she knew that this was the kind of opportunity that was now part of her new reality. The invitation came with a personal letter from the organization's president, praising her act of courage and emphasizing the need for people like her to inspire a new generation. On the night of the event, Emily's stomach was in knots. The hall was packed. There were journalists, activists, politicians, and students. She, who had never liked being the center of attention, now stood before hundreds of people waiting to hear her. Her hands were sweaty as she waited to be called to the stage. "You can do this," she told herself over and over, trying to stay calm. Finally, her name was announced, and Emily walked onto the stage to a round of applause. The sound echoed through the hall, but everything seemed muffled to her ears. As she looked at the audience, for a moment she thought she wouldn't be able to speak. But then, something changed. The words of Henry and Margaret, the couple she had defended, came to her mind. She remembered why she was there, what had motivated her from the start. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "I'm not a professional activist," she started, her voice slightly shaky. "I'm not an expert on racial issues, nor a natural leader. I'm just a young woman who, for a few minutes, refused to stay silent in the face of something wrong. And yet, here I am, standing before you, not because I did something extraordinary, but because I chose to do what everyone should do: stand up for what is right." The room was silent, all eyes fixed on her. Emily continued, feeling her courage grow with every word. "On that bus, I saw a couple being humiliated simply because of the color of their skin. And in that moment, I realized that if I stayed quiet, I would be complicit in that injustice. Racism is not a problem we can ignore. It's not something that belongs to the past. It's here, now, and it affects millions of people every day. And sometimes, the only thing that stands between injustice and human dignity is the courage of someone to stand up and say, 'This isn't right.'" When Emily finished, the audience remained silent for a few seconds, until a wave of applause filled the hall. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, but also fear. She had spoken from the heart, but she knew her words would now be analyzed, debated, maybe even distorted. There was no turning back. She was officially part of something bigger than she had ever imagined. After the event, Emily was surrounded by journalists and supporters. Everyone wanted a moment with the girl from the bus. The emotional toll was starting to weigh on her, but she knew she couldn't back down. She had committed herself to a cause, and now she needed to push forward. However, not all the consequences of her new public life were positive. The hateful messages on social media intensified. Every move she made was criticized by a crowd of trolls and racists. Comments like, "She's just doing this for fame," and "Who does she think she is to talk about racism?" became constant. Emily started to realize that no matter how much she wanted to help, being a voice against prejudice also made her a target. The worst moment came when her family started being affected. One night, while they were having dinner together, her father, David, looked at her with a serious expression. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice heavy. "We're proud of what you're doing, but things are getting out of control." She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" David sighed and showed her a series of anonymous letters that had been arriving at the family's home over the past few weeks. Some contained racist insults, others thinly veiled threats. "This last one was the worst," he said, handing her the most recent letter. The words were harsh, filled with hate, and an explicit threat made it clear that if Emily continued her activism, her family might suffer the consequences. Emily felt the world crumble around her. Her parents had always been her safe harbor, and now they were being dragged into the storm. The pressure in her chest increased, and she struggled to hold back her tears. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "You shouldn't be going through this." Her mother, Laura, approached and hugged her. "We knew there would be consequences when you decided to follow this path. But we're with you, no matter what happens." Despite her parents' words of support, Emily couldn't shake the guilt. What had started as a spontaneous act of courage now seemed to be turning into a threat to her family. Was she really willing to pay that price? She spent that night lying awake, reflecting on everything. She had become a hero to some, but a villain to others. The dream of going to college and building a bright future was becoming increasingly entangled with the responsibility of being a public voice. And in the middle of it all, there was the growing fear that the price she would pay would be more than she could bear. The next day, Emily decided to meet with Edward Thompson again. She knew she needed guidance. When they met at a quiet restaurant in the city center, she didn't waste time on formalities. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice thick with emotion, "I need help. I don't know if I can continue down this path. My family is being threatened, and everything feels like it's falling apart." Edward looked at her with compassion, sensing the internal struggle the young woman was facing. He gestured for her to sit down and calmly said, "Emily, courage comes with sacrifices. And unfortunately, fighting for what's right isn't always easy. But you're not alone. There are many people who want to help you carry this burden. What you need to decide now is how far you're willing to go." Edward's words echoed in Emily's mind. She didn't know the answer yet, but one thing was clear. The path she had chosen was difficult, and the price of courage was high. However, now she had to decide whether to keep going, facing the obstacles with determination, or to step back and let the storm pass. The choice was in her hands. After the conversation with Edward Thompson, Emily felt the weight of the decision she had to make. His words resonated within her. You need to decide how far you're willing to go. Up until that moment, she had been carried along by the tide of circumstances, reacting to the events unfolding around her. But now, she stood at a crossroads, a decision that would shape her future, perhaps forever. The following days were marked by an internal silence that contrasted with the whirlwind of emotions around her. The threats continued to arrive, and her family was constantly worried about their safety. Activism had brought fame, but also danger. What had started as a spontaneous act of courage was turning into an ongoing battle, and Emily felt like she was at a breaking point. Protect her family, retreat, and return to normalcy, or persist, knowing the risks were great. One afternoon, she went out for a walk by herself, something she hadn't done in a long time. Walking had always helped her think. The trees along the streets of her town were bare from the early winter frosts, and the dry leaves made a comforting sound under her feet. With each step, she felt her heart grow heavier, as if the options before her were burdens impossible to balance. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she saw she had received a new message. It was from Margaret Williams, the woman Emily had defended on the bus. "Emily, I'd love to see you again if you have time. Henry and I are worried about you. Come visit us when you can." She read the message several times, and something inside her urged her to go to the Williams house immediately. They had been a point of calm amidst the storm, and perhaps talking to them would give her the clarity she so desperately sought. When she arrived, she was greeted with the same warmth as before. Margaret hugged her, and Henry soon appeared, offering her a cup of tea. The room was bathed in soft light, and the atmosphere was calm, a kind of refuge from the chaos that Emily's life had become. "We've been keeping up with everything that's happening with you, dear," said Margaret, her voice full of compassion. "And we know things haven't been easy." Henry nodded, taking a sip of his tea. "We've seen how much this is consuming you, and we don't want you to get hurt anymore because of us." Emily looked at them, feeling tears burn in her eyes. "You don't understand. I didn't do it for fame or for recognition. I did it because I couldn't stand still. But now, everything is falling apart. My family is being threatened, and I don't know if I can keep going. I feel like I'm letting everyone down." Margaret moved closer, holding Emily's hand. "You were our strength when we needed it most, Emily. But now, you need to find your own strength. The world is full of injustices, and you've already done more than many would. The choice you make, whether to keep fighting or to take care of your own safety, doesn't make you any less brave. You need to do what's right for you." Margaret's words echoed in Emily's heart. As much as she wanted to fight, something even bigger was at stake. Her well-being, her family's safety, and even her own peace of mind. However, the thought of walking away also made her feel like a traitor. She knew many people were counting on her, seeing her as a figure of inspiration and strength. As she pondered, Henry, who had been silent until then, spoke in a firm but gentle tone. You know, Emily, when Margaret and I were young, we faced similar battles. It wasn't easy being an interracial couple back then. The world looked at us with hate, and many times we thought about giving up. But we learned something very important over the years. You can't save the whole world. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take care of yourself and those you love. And it's okay if you can't carry the whole weight on your shoulders. Those words, coming from someone who had lived a life of struggles and sacrifices, touched Emily deeply. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't being pressured to make a right or wrong decision. Instead, the Williams were reminding her of something fundamental. She was still young. She still had a life ahead of her. And above all, she deserved to find her own happiness, whatever path she chose. That night, back in her room, Emily reflected on the conversation. She looked at the college acceptance letter she had received, remembering that, as difficult as the choice was, she now had a unique opportunity in her hands. She could use this chance to study, grow, and perhaps in the future find more effective ways to fight for justice. The fight didn't have to be now. It didn't have to be immediate, but the fire inside her wouldn't go out. That night, back in her room, Emily reflected on the conversation. She looked at the college acceptance letter she had received, remembering that, as difficult as the choice was, she now had a unique opportunity in her hands. She could use this chance to study, grow, and perhaps in the future, find more effective ways to fight for justice. The fight didn't have to be now. It didn't have to be immediate, but the fire inside her wouldn't go out. The next day, she sat down with her parents. David's face was lined with worry, but he embraced her tenderly, showing that no matter what decision she made, he would support her. I've decided, Dad. Mom, I'm going to college. I want to study. I want to learn more about the world. I want to prepare to do something bigger in the future. But right now, I need to step away from all this confusion. I need to take care of myself, and you too. Her parents nodded, relieved. Laura wiped away a tear sliding down her cheek and hugged her tightly. We're so proud of you, Emily, and we're here to support you, always. In the days that followed, Emily announced her decision to focus on her studies and step away from the public eye for a while. It was a difficult decision, and many people on social media reacted with frustration, while others supported her, recognizing her right to take care of herself. Edward Thompson, upon hearing of her decision, offered his full support, reinforcing that she would always have opportunities to get involved in his social projects whenever she was ready. Emily knew this decision wasn't an end, but a new beginning. She was choosing herself, her mental health, and a future that was still being shaped. The road to justice and equality was long, and she wanted to be ready to walk it, but in her own time. On the morning of her departure for college, Emily felt strangely light. Her family accompanied her to the airport, and as they waited for the flight, her phone buzzed with new messages of support. Among them, one final message from Margaret Williams. Remember, you've already made a difference. What comes next is just the beginning of something even bigger. We're proud of you. Emily smiled, tucking her phone in her pocket, feeling a new wave of hope growing inside her. There was so much to be done in the world, but now she had time, and more than ever, she was ready to discover who she really was and what she could do. She knew that one day she would return to the fight. But for now, her greatest act of courage was simply to live her own life and prepare for the future that awaited her. The first semester at college brought Emily a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in a long time. Away from the media pressure and the spotlight, she reconnected with her own essence. The sleepless nights of anxiety and fear were gradually replaced by hours of deep study, new friendships, and the excitement of learning. She chose courses that would help her better understand social issues and civil rights, but she also allowed herself to explore new passions. Philosophy, literature, sociology. Each subject opened new doors in her mind, showing her the complexity of the world while also illuminating the possibilities for change. Still, it wasn't an easy transition. During the first few weeks, Emily struggled with guilt. Had she betrayed the expectations of the people who saw her as a hero? Should she have continued her public fight instead of stepping away to take care of herself? But over time, she began to realize that self-care wasn't an act of selfishness, but rather of strength. If she wanted to one day do something truly meaningful, she first needed to feel whole. Activism, she understood, wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon, and she was only at the beginning of her journey. One of the most decisive moments during this period of transition came on a sunny afternoon at the start of spring. Emily was sitting under a tree on campus, reviewing her notes for an exam, when she received an unexpected message on her phone. It was from Edward Thompson. "Emily, I'm organizing a charity event in support of civil rights causes. I know you're focused on your studies, but it would be an honor if you would accept the invitation to be the guest of honor. Think of it as a small step back into the world you'll one day help to change. No pressure, just an opportunity to be among friends." She read the message over and over. It had been months since she had distanced herself from public life, and now the invitation felt like a call. A gentle reminder that she still had a role to play in the world, but that she could do it at her own pace, in her own way. After some thought, Emily decided to accept the invitation. Something inside her had changed. She was no longer the scared girl who felt overwhelmed by the expectations of others. Now, she knew who she was and what she wanted. And most importantly, she knew she could balance her personal life with the greater mission that had always pulsed in her heart. The event was set for a summer evening, in an elegant hall, illuminated by old chandeliers and adorned with photographs depicting decades of civil rights struggles. Emily arrived accompanied by her parents, who hugged her proudly as they saw how much their daughter had grown since that fateful day on the bus. As she walked through the hall, she recognized familiar faces and met new friends who had followed her story. Edward Thompson, always cordial, greeted her with a warm smile and introduced her to several important figures in the civil rights movement. But for Emily, the most special moment of the evening was when she spotted Henry and Margaret Williams sitting at a table in the back of the room. They stood when they saw her, and once again, Margaret pulled her into a tight hug. "I knew you'd come back to shine, Emily," Margaret said, her eyes brimming with pride. "You've always had that light inside you. Thank you for believing in me, even when I doubted myself," Emily replied, her voice filled with emotion. When it was Henry's turn to speak, he took Emily's hands and looked deeply into her eyes. "You made the right choice, my dear. And now, you're stronger than ever. Never underestimate the power of following your own path." Those words, from someone who knew the true meaning of struggle and sacrifice, touched Emily's heart deeply. She felt an inner peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. During the event, Edward asked everyone for a moment of attention. The hall fell silent as he stepped onto the stage. "Today, we are here to celebrate courage, strength, and the commitment to fight for a more just world. And there's no better example of all of this than our guest of honor, Emily Collins. The courage she showed wasn't just a one-time act. It's something that will continue to guide her actions and inspire all of us." Emily was called to the stage, and as she walked up, she felt her heart racing. But this time it wasn't nerves that dominated her. It was the emotion of knowing that she was finally ready for this moment. As she faced the smiling faces in the crowd, she realized she wasn't alone in this fight. There were thousands of people committed to the same cause. She was no longer a solitary figure standing against a tide of injustice. Now, she was among friends, allies, all moving in the same direction. She took the microphone and took a deep breath, letting the weight of everything she had been through pour into her words. "When it all began, I was just an 18-year-old girl, acting on impulse, trying to stand up for what I believed was right. I never imagined that moment would change my life forever. But what I've learned since then is that true courage isn't just standing up against injustice once. It's continuing, day after day, to face fear, criticism, and challenges, and still choose to move forward. The audience was completely silent, captivated by the sincerity in her words. I was afraid. I stepped back. And in that time, I understood that taking care of yourself is also part of the fight. Because to be a strong voice, you need to be okay with yourself. Now, I'm ready to return, to continue, but this time with a clearer understanding of what I'm fighting for and who I'm fighting for. And I know I'm not alone. The applause that followed was deafening. Emily felt enveloped by the support, by the voices that had joined hers, turning that moment into a celebration of collective strength. Tears ran down her face, but this time, they were tears of joy and relief. That night, as she looked up at the stars in the clear summer sky, Emily felt that she had finally found her place in the world. The journey was still long, the challenges still many, but now she was equipped with the tools she needed. Not just knowledge, but also love, support, and above all, courage. She knew she couldn't change the world alone, but she also knew that, alongside those who stood with her, she could make a real difference. Life was just beginning, and the future shone with endless possibilities. Emily smiled, feeling the gentle breeze on her face. And for the first time in a long while, she was truly at peace. The future was hers, and she was ready to face it with all her strength and hope. If you were moved by this story, tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know which part of the world you're following this journey from. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel and like this video for more inspiring stories like this one. Together, we can spread even more courage and hope. Until the next video.